Are you looking for quality APA continuing education courses on culture and diversity? Well, we got you covered. We're excited for you to explore our courses that we're offering a 50% discount for our listeners. Use the code FRIENDS50, that's all caps, at the checkout when you register for your courses. Visit us at www.tmcinstitute.org to explore our live and on-demand psychology CE courses. Now onward to today's episode. I'm excited to introduce our guest today, Dr. Jennifer Jones-Damis, a licensed psychologist in New York and New Jersey, and a licensed professional counselor in New Jersey. She serves as the Director of Counseling at ADAP and Psychiatric Services at Rutgers University. Dr. J has dedicated her career to understanding and treating traumatic stress, especially in underserved populations. Her impressive background includes a 2-year postdoctoral fellowship in traumatic stress at Mount Sinai Beth Israel Medical Center, where she worked with youth and juvenile justice system. She also held key leadership roles at some of the nation's largest correctional facilities, including Rikers Island and the Essex County Jail in New Jersey, where she led mental health initiatives and spearheaded alternatives to solitary confinement. As an active member of the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, Dr. J has been a strong advocate for addressing how educators and counselors respond to race and trauma in both classroom and therapeutic settings. She also holds state and national board positions with the Association of Black Psychologists, where she champions the mental health needs of the Black community. Her work extends beyond direct practice and advocacy. In fact, Dr. J is the co-author of the book Racial Trauma in Black Clients, Effective Practice for Clinicians, and her research and publications on trauma, school discipline, and student achievement have been featured at major national conferences and in academic journals. She also shares her insights on racial trauma through her Psychology Today blog. As a Black psychologist, Dr. J will be discussing more about her book, Racial Trauma in Black Clients, and how we as therapists can advance our understanding beyond traditional training in addressing race-based trauma. Dr. J, oh my gosh, it is such an honor to speak with you today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
I have your book on hand. Okay, and we're going to be talking about this. And we really can't talk enough about race-based trauma. And I think one of the conversations that you and I had that was really illuminating is going beyond diagnoses.
Yeah.
And there's so many rich, informative information in this book. So maybe some pretext. Why don't you share with us, how did you arrive at coming up with this book idea?
Sure. So we wanted to focus on giving voice to those who often feel like they're not heard, and really diving into what racial trauma is. And so in doing that, we wanted to make sure we recognize that racial trauma is not a diagnosis. We are not diagnosing people with racial trauma. There's nothing wrong with folks who've experienced racial trauma. And what we sort of came up with was this idea that when you've been through race-based harm, whether it be something like microaggressions or have been called out of your name by maybe a racial epithet, or even watching videos of people being hurt, harmed, or killed who look like you, that has an impact. And when it has an impact, oftentimes the result is it affects your job, it affects how you parent, it affects how you think, it affects how you kind of move through this world. And we wanted to point out that it's a natural reaction to a really unnatural, horrible things that happen in this world. And so that's sort of the foundation of the book, is looking at racial trauma in many different aspects of community settings, school settings, and what it looks like in a therapy room.
And you've seen the progression, or I would say children and adolescents all the way to young adulthood, because you work in those different settings. And I would imagine that has really informed how you've written this book.
It has, because no matter what age, there is an impact. And so, as you mentioned, I'm a part of the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. We actually created a document called Addressing Race in the Classroom, how to look at assisting young people when there were so many live stream videos of Black men and women being hurt, harmed, or killed, that what we are intaking, our kids are intaking. And folks think sometimes, oh, they're 5 or 6. They might not be as impacted, but they pick up cues on their caretakers. If I'm impacted, my children will be impacted. It changes the way in which I might interact with them, how protective I am of them, if I'm afraid for their safety. And so the book does look at the different age ranges. There's a whole chapter on looking at racial trauma in schools that I wrote, and how it manifests itself differently than just trauma.
Yeah, you actually gave some great clinical case examples of how to even intervene in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
Probably mostly applicable for a lot of counselors and school psychologists who are working in those settings.
Yeah.
Without giving the book away, and is there a specific example you like to maybe entice our listeners to? Yeah.
Sure. There was this really good example, which was based on a composite of basically true stories. So we'll call this young man Jack, since you're Jack. He was suspended from school. He ended up doing something in his math class. He was suspended and he came back to school. And when he came back, what happened was in that very same math class, there was no sort of re-entry for him. There was no figuring out what was going on between him and the teacher. He was just sort of brought back into class. And when he was brought back into class, the teacher often called on him for stuff that he had missed. And so he got really frustrated and got up to leave the classroom. And when he left the classroom, unfortunately, the teacher tried to step in front of him and block his way from leaving the classroom. And so he ended up shouldering the teacher to move her out the way. And he was charged with assault. And that is a really, I would say, drastic example, but this is sort of the culmination of not being able to adequately address behavior in the classroom, looking at who is teaching our children and what sort of cultural humility and competency they have, what our rules are on zero tolerance. Obviously, we don't condone violence in any way of a student to a teacher to the student, but sort of looking at what led up to this event for him to eventually get expelled. And racial trauma isn't something as simple as, oh, a teacher is racist towards a student. That's rarely the case. What it is the policies and procedures that are happening in the school that implicitly push our kids out. And so we have students who often get suspended, often get sent out to the principal's office, often are disengaged because the curriculum doesn't reflect who they are or things that they want to learn.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's such a great example. I think there are many other examples you gave in the book about how, school psychologists can intervene by also
Mm-hmm.
working with the parents to is
Yes.
to transition back into classroom if a child is suspended, and more importantly, why did a child even get suspended? Let's understand
Yeah.
the why. So I also, for our listeners, maybe I found something very illuminating about this book, and my hope is people, as they're thinking about how to be culturally informed and this very pivotal point of we need to look beyond the diagnoses, because there's some debate about, oh, do we put racial trauma in the DSM? And
Mm-hmm.
that's not the purpose of our conversation. However,
Mm-hmm.
do understand if we do put in a DSM, it does create this problem that we're dealing with. It becomes a diagnosis as opposed to an issue, racism, that has happened onto people.
Yeah, so the key is like right now, if we look at PTSD, the very typical diagnosis of someone who's gone through trauma and they're diagnosed with PTSD, what's interesting is how they define trauma. So trauma can be an act that happens to you, something you witness, sometimes even hearing hearing traumatic things can be considered a trauma. What the DSM does not take into account is vicarious racial trauma. So if anything is going to go in a DSM, that's what should go in. And what that is watching, seeing, hearing stories of individuals who look like you that are being hurt, harmed, or killed. And the DSM, before DSM-5, they doubled down on that you can't be traumatized via media. And so when September 11th happened, which was interesting, all of us watched the towers fall. We all saw it. We as a whole society were traumatized. Yet, if that was the only event, you could not diagnose PTSD if I just saw it on television. And what's so interesting about racial trauma is that even if it doesn't happen to you directly, watching it happen to someone who you can put yourself in those shoes can very well cause maybe PTSD-esque symptoms, and symptoms that are really unique to racial trauma. There are a few things that sort of happen. One, you can become intensely like self-secluded, like you only talk to folks who look like you, who are a part of your community, because you're fearful of those from the outside. Another thing is sometimes using more alcohol and drugs. It's not that because you've gone through racial trauma, you all of a sudden become a user. It is how are you coping with those traumatic things that you've seen or that you've gone through. If you can't sleep at night, are you taking one Ambien and one turns into two, or one glass of wine turns into two or three? And how are you actually healing from the trauma and not necessarily just coping with it? One example I give in the book, and I don't mind giving it away, is if we are both sitting in a room and it is freezing cold, what do? We cope by we put on a sweater. Tomorrow, what do we do if it's freezing cold in a room? Yet again, we put on a sweater. After a while, you might start to think, I might just be a cold person. Something's wrong with me. I have to carry a sweater everywhere I go. That's how racial trauma is, in that it's not you that's cold. The room is cold and you are coping with it. And so racial trauma, it's not you that something's wrong with you, that you're defensive or having to sort of not trust everybody. What's wrong is that you're living in a society, it's set up sort of to see you fail or to impact you in such a way that it's really hard to overcome and hard to not think something is wrong with you. And when Dr. Kelly Moore and I wrote this book, we wanted to put out there that there's nothing wrong with us. There's something wrong with the society that we are living in, that we're embedded in, and that what's happening is happening to us. It's not something that is innate. So there should not be a diagnosis racial trauma in the DSM, because that means the issue is within the person.
Right.
And
And
the
it takes
person,
away the responsibility,
yes,
and I remember
definitely.
reading that example in the book. I thought, oh my gosh, that's such a wonderful metaphor
Mm-hmm.
and really shining light to the issue of racial trauma. Now, let's
Yeah,
get into some practical terms, because a lot of
sure.
our listeners are clinicians and therapists. I want to actually read something directly from the book, because
Okay.
oftentimes we are taught this
Mm-hmm.
method of questioning or engagement with clients.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, I remember, in class, we often are taught these indirect prompts. So, for example, can you tell me more about prior times in your life where you felt very anxious or fearful? So
Mm-hmm.
that's an indirect prompt in terms of assessing a client's anxiety or degree of anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you're proposing that we can't be indirect. We need to really lean into the client's experience. And so you actually offer like direct prompts as an
Mm-hmm.
example. In what way has your identity or cultural background impacted your expectations of yourself,
Mm-hmm.
including your race? And so,
Mm-hmm.
really naming it. And I love these practical examples in this book.
Yes. And I think the key is to be able to not be afraid of talking about race. It is the elephant in the room, whether you are of the same race as your client or not. Um, you want to, more than just in the intake, bring up race and culture, ethnicity, and how they are viewing their concerns and what lens are they seeing it through. And then it helps you as the clinician to see through their lens. And another thing we've often been taught is to challenge folks. So someone says, I didn't get a raise because I'm Black. So they come in and they say that. And sometimes our first thought was, well, like, what's the evidence? Well, are you sure? And we start questioning someone's experience. And there's nothing wrong with good challenging in therapy, but when it comes to racial trauma and it comes to validating someone's experience, someone came into the room and said, I didn't get the job because I'm Black. Your job is to not to debate it, to counter it. Your job is to listen, to sit with it, figure out why they feel that way, and not to decide if it's true or not. That's not the goal. For that person, that's where they're sitting. And it's so hard for us, whether you're a Black, white, Asian clinician, sometimes to just sit with a person's experience. We've been taught to keep challenging cognitions, behavioral,
Yeah, we're
CBT, all of
challenged. Is it irrational? Could this be a
that.
perception as opposed to, wait, this is the reality. This
Mhm.
happens.
Yes. And
Yeah,
because oftentimes it's not the reality of the clinician, we question the reality of our clients.
yeah, yeah. So,
Mhm.
there's just so many wonderful information in this book. Again, without giving too much, I really encourage folks to pick this up. It's available on Amazon.
It's on Amazon and it's also sold by Guilford
Ah,
Press.
got
Mhm.
it. We'll definitely provide the links to that. So, I'm curious, can you share with us any memorable events and circumstances that actually influenced how you got here today?
Yes. So before this book was even a thought, my mentor, Nancy Boyd Franklin, was telling me a lot of my experiences and a lot of my talks. She says, these are all book chapters. People need to know the work that you're doing. And so I'm very grateful to Dr. Nancy Boyd Franklin. But it started when I was working in the Red Hook courts in New York. And so I worked with court ordered adolescents, and they were court ordered to my trauma group. So whether or not you can court order trauma treatment is another debate, but they were there. And the summer before the groups, Eric Garner was murdered in New York, and Michael Brown was murdered as well. And right around Thanksgiving, the no indictments came out for both of those cases, nearly back to back. And I almost wondered if this was planned. And so I walk into our group. We ran this trauma group I want to say every Monday. And I think the no indictments came out right before Thanksgiving. And my kids were heated and they were saying things that were scary to me. So, for example, one of them said, well, we should go show them what it's like. We should go kill a cop. And Mama Bear and me was like, oh my God, you can't say that, but luckily I didn't go that route. I just sort of listened. And my counterpart, who I was a postdoc at the time, again, let them express themselves. And it taught me that our first instinct to tell them, no, you can't say that. I know you can't do that, to pause and figure out the why, what's underneath all of that. So they were angry. And so instead of saying, yes, go out and kill a cop, because that's not what we wanted them to do, we said, well, what are you trying to get them to feel? Like, we want them to feel what we feel, how it's not fair that every time we get arrested or something happens to us, that there's no justice. And so letting them talk through it was so powerful. And we walked them through, well, what do you want your end goal to be? And the end goal was to have others know what it's like to feel not seen, to know what it's like to feel like there's no justice, and let them talk through it. And that was a turning point for me because we weren't having these conversations as adults with each other. And all of a sudden, the kids were coming in talking about it. And so it really got me to thinking about how we need to have more trainings about how to talk about race, how to have these difficult conversations. Because if we can't, like if Jack and Jennifer can't have these conversations, we're not going to be able to have them with the kids that we work with. And so that was a turning point for me. And from there, working at Rikers Island and then Essex County Jail, and then countless trainings of probation and correction officers about race and the impact of race. It all started with those kids in New York.
Wow. Well, they
Mhm.
really had an impact on you. And, just thank you so much for sharing this because I
Yeah.
can tell there is some vulnerability in
Mhm.
discussing, hey, this was difficult for me,
Mhm.
also the kids.
Yeah.
And you're right.
Mhm.
We're not taught in graduate school
No.
how to purposefully talk about race.
Yes. And
We
it's
have, yeah,
such a critical, pivotal thing in our society that we don't talk about. And folks want to sort of brush it under the rug or say, I don't see color and all of the things to try to sugarcoat it. But there's no need to sugarcoat race. It's okay to be proud of who you are. It's okay to recognize that you have bias, recognize that you might have, you do have implicit bias. And this is for clinicians of all races. And so the book really dives into what can we do differently. Not that we're doing anything wrong per se, but what can we start doing more of to help our clients feel safer in the space, to recognize the lens that they're seeing their problems through, and to know when a client comes in and says, I'm stressed out and I can't stand my job, to dig a little deeper and to think about, what's the cultural makeup of that job? Are they the only person of color there? Are they experiencing racism? They often don't come into session and just say, I experienced racism and this is my problem with my boss. It's couched with, I have anxiety, I have a hard time speaking in front of people, and it's clouded with all these DSM diagnoses, but underneath it, it's race, it's racial trauma.
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Now, as a person of color, what were some challenges that you faced and overcame that you would be willing to share?
For me, it's definitely that old adage that you have to work twice as hard to get half as far. My parents instilled in me the importance of education, the importance of working hard. And I would say between society really setting up I identify as a African American cisgendered woman, that if I didn't get an education, if I didn't really dive deep and try to become quote unquote somebody, that I'd be a statistic. And I remember applying for my graduate program, my doctorate program, didn't get in the first time. And then the second time I did get an interview, was myself and one other Black girl in the whole cohort of interviewers. It's about 35 students being interviewed. And in my head, I thought, wow, she's my competition, not the other 34 people. It was her, because there's no way they're going to let two Black people into this
Oh
program.
gosh.
And fast forward, they actually let myself, and her name is Dr. Jenya Gaskin. And we talk about this to this day, that how sad it is that we were each other's competition, because we knew we're supposed to be there, but the chances of two Black people getting into the program, what are the chances? And so I think what I've sort of learned as being like an African American woman is that I don't have to compete with other African American women. We all can help each other up, but I often have to remind myself that just doing my job and doing it well, that I don't have to go above and beyond and beyond and beyond to prove that I need to be here, is something that has been really a lifelong lesson for me, because it's tough being the only one in spaces and feeling like you're questioned of, how did you get here? As we're talking about all the DEI stuff that's happening around this country, and the idea that people are DEI hires or they're not really qualified, while I know that to my core not to be true, day to day, sometimes it creeps in and you think, I need to show them why I'm here. But actually, I don't.
You
They
don't.
should
You
show me
get caught,
why
right?
they're here.
Yeah, we caught in a trap of trying to fight this
Yes,
losing narrative, losing story. I have to keep
yes,
fighting. Well, you're fighting, and then you lose track of what you're really fighting for.
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. And for you, what does it mean to be a Black psychologist?
It means the world. It means that I am now somebody who can help others, and someone who can help other upcoming psychologists come up. And so I'm really grateful. Like I mentioned, Dr. Nancy Boyd Franklin, I have Dr. Theopia Jackson, Dr. Cheryl Grills. There are a handful of Black female psychologists that sort of paved the way. And to know that I can be that for others is just, to me, awe-inspiring.
And Dr. J, how can we support you?
Encourage folks to go on and get their doctorate, people of color to get their doctorate in psychology. I think me being first generation and right into college outside of high school, no one told me that you didn't need to get a master's to get a doctorate. That most programs you get your master's along the way. So I spent $60,000 getting a master's, and then I spent another, God knows how much, getting a doctorate. And no one said off the bat, why don't, not say aiming low without a doctorate, but just aim high. And so how you can help me help others is spreading the word that a doctorate is achievable, that it can be paid for if you get the right type of scholarships and the right types of programs, and help other first generation kids. I call them kids, but young adults who don't necessarily have a mentor and know sort of how to navigate higher education.
Yeah. Well, Dr. J, any final thoughts?
I think that's it. I'm just really excited about this book. It's been out now for about 6 months, and I'm already seeing residual impact. And I just hope that folks really enjoy it and tell me what else they want to hear about. So when we do our part 2, we'll make sure we include it.
Yeah, we'll definitely include links and also your contact information so folks can send you feedback when they read the book.
Thank you.
Well, Dr. J, thank you so much for having this wonderful conversation. I'm excited for your book and your journey. Again, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
A huge thank you to our listeners. If you enjoyed this episode, please share and subscribe to People of Color in Psychology. You can also support us by registering for continuing education courses or making a one-time donation on the Multicultural Counseling Institute's website. Your feedback is important to us, so feel free to send an email, a message on LinkedIn, or leave a voice message on our website. Until next time, this is your host, Jack Sun.